Petworking is presented by Maya Strategy Group, a leading market research and strategy consulting firm, helping clients in the pet care and animal health industries navigate strategic challenges for almost 2 decades. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Petworking. I'm Peter Kenseth, Vice President and Partner at Maya Strategy Group, and I am here today with the COO of Nulo, Dr. Greg Aldrich. Dr. Aldrich came to Nulo about I think 15 months ago, he said when we were talking, and he comes to Nulo from a former position as an associate professor at Kansas State, which is one of the leading institutions in pet nutrition research. Dr. Aldrich has been working with Nulo since prior to the brand's founding, going back almost 15 years, maybe a little more than 15 years. And he's recently signed on and is now spearheading their operations and bringing his expertise in the pet nutrition space directly to the company. Nulo had a series of exciting new launches at Global Pet, which I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Aldrich about. They launched a cold press diet. They launched gently cooked, shelf stable, gently cooked. So another entry into an adjacent space to the fresh, frozen, refrigerated category. And they also rebranded their freeze dried and launched some new canned cat offerings. So lots of exciting stuff going on over there, but I won't talk the whole day. Dr. Aldrich, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Petworking.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to visit with you and your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're psyched to have you on. It's always great to get people who really know what they're talking about in terms of pet nutrition and who have contributed to advancing the science and the research in this space, as I know you have done for many, many years. So maybe we could start. Can you talk to us a little bit about your background and your work at Kansas State prior to coming to Nulo?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. We'll start back probably about 40 years ago. I started in the animal food industry and found that was an area that I had a good aptitude for, and continued in that process on to graduate school. And upon completing graduate training, my PhD out of Illinois, I went to work for the little company out of Ohio called the IAMS Company, and had a great pleasure to work in that area for a lot of years. So about 30 years now working in the pet trade specifically. And in the last 20 years, was a nutrition consultant providing technical support, formulation, and new product development resources to emerging pet food companies. And many of them were startups. And it was during that time in 2009 that I met Michael Landa, who's the CEO and founder of Nulo. And we began to explore opportunities for a premium set of products that fit into a more active lifestyle, both for the pet owner and their companion animal. Simultaneous to that, in about 2011, 2012, I started to do some work at Kansas State University, initially just building prototypes for some of my pet food clients using their facilities. And one thing led to the next, and I began to teach and ultimately joined the faculty as a research scientist, training graduate students and teaching courses in pet food science. So it's during that period of time I was really focused on working in areas that would explore the interaction between thermal processing or cooking that we apply to pet foods and how that impacts nutrition. So nutrition from a palatability, shelf life, nutrition, and food safety standpoint. And we continued that work, and it continues to this day with a faculty member that's followed me, one of my former graduate students, Dr. Julia Pizzali. And so joining Nulo this last year has been a continuation of work that Michael and I started in 2009. And with the research that I was doing at K-State, looking at effects of processing, this position at Nulo's allowed me the unique kind of opportunity to take that research and learning and impart it into new products that we bring to the marketplace. So the idea here is that I'm on the pursuit of the perfect pet food, and that involves ingredient selection and the proper level of food processing or cooking.
Yeah, and I feel and both obviously very important, but I being only a couple weeks out from Global Pet, I feel like what we really saw at this show was just an explosion into the brands really focusing on minimally processed, no heat, and you know imparting that to and drawing the connection between minimal processing and no heat and greater nutrient retention, greater nutrient density, nutrient availability. Obviously, there's another side to the nutrient density part of the equation with where you're sourcing your ingredients, obviously, and your
Mm-hmm.
selection of
Mm-hmm.
the ingredients, both from your selection of meats and produce to where you're getting them from. And we've done some talks on the show here with regenerative agriculture. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I know it's a two-part question. Maybe we could start, with your focus on minimal processing and no heat. And I know there's been some research published. Recently we've talked to Dr. Impleman at Primal Pet Foods,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
they came out with a series of papers, and I think a third one to come, showing the greater nutritional efficacy of a raw or freeze-dried diet
Mm-hmm.
as compared to extruded kibble, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it, we've also seen now Nulo launching cold pressed, and there were air dried, steam dried, um,
Mm-hmm.
slow cooked offerings all over the floor at Global Pet. So to talk to us a little bit about basically what you've brought to market with cold pressed and how that fits into the your broader research focus of minimal processing. No.
Yeah. So I think so the question and this whole notion of the way in which we bring food to our companion animals has been an evolution. Early on, it was really about food form, and in the late 1990s, early 2000s, we were really focused on the nutritional composition and discovering what were the true requirements for the animal. And then in the early 2000s, 2010s, we've been focused on ingredients and which ones are the right mix, which ones provide us with the optimal nutrition for the pet. But now in this last era, we're starting to move more into the notion that the cooking time and temperature has an influence on both the nutritional bioavailability as well as destruction of some or reduction in some nutrients. We even get some cross-linking of some components that might be anti-nutritional. And so this whole idea of where we're going next in the pet era, pet food era, is really trying to explore what time, temperature, and processing might do to either the benefit of the food or, in some cases, the benefit of the animal per se. We've leaned into this whole area in regards to minimally processed. It's not zero processing, but it's trying to find the perfect time temperature for each of the components of a pet food. And to kind of think about pet food different than human food, commonly we're creating a convenient format where we've included the proteins and the fats and the carbohydrates and the minerals and the vitamins. We're throwing them all together, and then we're cooking them and putting them into a single unit so that it makes it convenient and easy for the pet owner, the pet parent, to deliver to their pet on a routine basis. And many of us are a little bit concerned about whether or not we have the proper nutrition. So we've provided that to the pet owner in that single package. But different than human foods, where we bring a piece of meat and a carbohydrate and your vegetables together in separate items on a plate. When we throw everything together, we get a lot of food chemical reactions when we add heat. And in some cases, things like the proteins may not need to be cooked as much as the carbohydrates to make them biologically available. Carbohydrates take a lot more energy to convert. The fats don't really need any cooking, and the vitamins, especially the fat-soluble vitamins, most certainly don't need a lot of heat and or a lot of air movement across them before they get oxidized. And the trace minerals that we add in, they'll react with the proteins and the fats. So we have to be careful in how we pull all this together and how much time and temperature we apply. And so our intent here is to make sure that we denature the proteins just enough to open them up and allow them to be more digestible. We want to make sure that whatever starches that we include into the diet are cooked properly so that we get just the right amount of digestibility. That process is called gelatinization. And yet we want some of that starch to be not cooked and indigestible, so it passes into the colon for fermentation, and that benefits gut health. We want to make sure that our trace minerals are at an adequate level, that our vitamins are at an adequate level, but we're not throwing a lot of oxygen across it in hot air so that we oxidize them and they become basically unavailable or destroyed. And then we want to make sure that we're not having other interactions like cross-linking of proteins. So what we're trying to do is get to that perfect sort of combination of the time, the temperature, and when and where that time and temperature are combined, and then put it into a convenient food package that is shelf stable and is safe so that we don't have to worry about health issues associated with pathogens for our companion animals. There was a lot there, but hopefully that kind of starts to touch on some of the pieces.
Yeah, no, I think we can definitely unpack that, and maybe a good place to start is kind of comparing your journey and focus on time and temperature with traditional manufacturing processes. So and what's out there compared to taking something and utilizing a freeze dried or cold pressed approach
Right.
versus extruded kibble. So yeah, as I understand it, if we look at extruded kibble, we're combining everything all together. We're rolling it, we're forming it into bits, and then
Yep.
it's subjected to very high temperature extrusion.
Right.
Which leads to a lot of those, if everything is all thrown in together beforehand, you're not able to kind of give the fats a separate treatment than the carbohydrates, then the proteins, then the vitamins. Similarly, in a canned process, everything is put into the can, and then the can is subjected to very high heat.
Right.
And obviously, they're both from a cost and a convenience standpoint. Um, you know, those things have their place, but I think what you're looking for, and what a lot of manufacturers are looking for now is, how do we optimize this and how do we, take that next step forward in optimizing nutrition, from a time and temperature basis.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing you alluded to there is, making it shelf stable and pathogen free. And, and that leads me to another thing that maybe you can touch on is, compared to raw, right? Because I think we hear a
Yeah.
lot, this is the, freeze dried, air dried, steam dried. It's alternative to raw, but
Mhm.
there are a lot of proponents out there that say raw food is the best food you
Mhm.
can give your dog or your cat. Um, so talk to us. Where do you stand versus the extruded kibble, canned,
Yeah.
and then raw
Yeah.
on the other end of the spectrum?
Well, my first goal in this is not to disparage any type of food product that's out there today. Certainly, we're in much better shape in 2024 than we were in 1994 in terms of our knowledge and our understanding of how best to feed our companion animals. We think or anticipate that kibble will continue to be a staple in the pet food industry. And it's not that it's bad, it's just we are asking the question, can we do better? And the process of extrusion, we're bringing in some of the ingredients that are already been cooked through rendered protein meals. We're using a great deal of starches to hold that kibble together. And many of those starches have a very high glycemic index. And our intent here is to use, as the nutritional philosophy of Nulo, a high meat protein, high protein diet with low carbohydrates and that are low glycemic index. and also to use some components like probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics for gut health. With all of those things in the equation, going through the extrusion process, we have to over fortify with vitamins. We have to be careful of how we stick that kibble together in the cooking process. Trying to get high protein, high meat is very difficult in a kibble without using some soluble animal proteins to help bind and create that foam. And so there's a lot of food science that goes into it to make those kibbles effective. I feel like we've got a good portfolio of products there, but the next step, again, in this journey to the perfect pet food, is to see if we can maybe take away some of the extra heat process and time and uh, shear that we go through this mechanical mixing process and make it one step better. Let me contrast again with the can, and we have a wet food. We go through this retort process to cook it, and for nutritional purposes, we could cook that food product a lot less time and make it a better product. But we're regulated by FDA and the USDA regulations under the Code of Federal Regulations on our time and temperature for heat penetration. And that heat penetration is about destroying spore-forming bacteria like Clostridium botulinum, which can cause botulism. And because of that, we're more worried about the sterilization, what they call commercial sterilization, at the far extreme end of the nutrition spectrum and safety spectrum. And the nutrition benefit's going to be way back here in the earlier phases of that cooking time. And so, we're having to weigh in this area of providing commercially prepared foods to companion animals. We're having to weigh this whole continuum of safety with nutrition. And that's the balance we're trying to play. And so moving into these processes like cold pressed, we're able to utilize the same sorts of blends of ingredients without having to go through that kind of shear and extreme heat and pressure processing that we would go into in extrusion, and the hot air drying that comes at the end, which is blowing oxygen across the product and causing a destruction of our fat soluble vitamins. And we're able to go through a process that's similar to a commercial sterilization, more of a pasteurization in a low and slow drying process, so that we're still getting pathogen control, but we're not blowing hot air across the product, and we're decreasing the overall amount of temperature, so we don't get as much protein cross-linking, and we don't get destruction of some of our probiotics and other compounds. We just don't get the interaction. So we're lowering the temperature, we're taking our time to get it right in that cooking or drying process, so that we're getting closer to what I would consider the ideal process. I'm going to go to the other extreme here real quick, if you give me just a second, and talk about raw. And we don't feel like there's anything necessarily or inherently wrong with raw. It is nutritionally high quality if we can make sure that we don't end up with too much fat into the product. That's one of the biggest challenges in raw products, is we end up with an imbalance with protein and fat, and that we end up with more cases, if you look at the FDA record for recalls, with the raw or unprocessed products. And the raw manufacturers have been working diligently to try to solve that equation with lots of different clever approaches to pasteurization, but we still have more incidences. So on the continuum, raw tends to be requiring more refrigeration. We have transport issues, we have shelf life challenges, and we have food safety challenges. And so as a food format, we've elected not to go down that path at the moment, because we feel like minimal amounts of processing may actually give us more nutritional value than less.
Okay. And greater safety in terms of
Yeah,
inconvenience, and I think that's one of the things where we see this balance, and where you mentioned, kibble's not going anywhere. Particularly for people with larger dogs, the idea of feeding your pet exclusively
right.
raw or freeze dried or cold pressed becomes a pretty, you know, daunting economic proposition. My dog Peony is 70 pounds, and
Yeah.
to feed her, exclusively freeze dried or exclusively raw, not not a place where I'm at right now. And um, so I think we see so often with raw, freeze dried, air dried manufacturers, it's almost positioned as you can feed it as a meal, you can feed it as a topper, you can feed it as a treat, but you're getting your pet those nutritional benefits, in some form or fashion. And I think you hit on it with the convenience. And I've long said, and I think you guys are doing a great thing with the shelf stable. I remember seeing a few years ago with Portland Pet Food, they introduced a shelf
Yeah.
stable fresh offering, and I said right away, my bet is shelf stable fresh might win out. Like nobody's doing it right now. There's very few. I
Right.
think you guys are. There's one other new launch I saw at Global Pet, but
Hmm.
those are
Hmm.
the only three I can think of. Is
Hmm. Hmm.
Nulo, Scott, and Portland Pet, who wasn't at the show, I don't think this year, but
Yeah.
doing that retort, hermetically sealed package, and
Hmm.
like you said, may not, there may be an opportunity to impart less heat with FDA and regulatory restrictions, but still less less processing than what you would see in a traditionally canned food, and looks, feels more like a human meal. And you don't have to worry about cold chain transportation, buying freezers. Um, Not to say that there's anything wrong with all the fresh, frozen, refrigerated product that's out there,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
again, you only have so much space in your freezer. You only have so much space in your fridge. There's only so many freezers and refrigerators in your pet stores or in your grocery store. Um, so it presents an additional challenge, I think, for manufacturers and consumers alike. And as we drive towards the perfect pet food, there's cost, there's convenience, and there's
Hmm.
nutrition, and there's trade-offs to every, and I guess along with nutrition, there's safety. You mentioned, the trade-offs with nutrition and safety and raw. Um, Dr. Aldrich, I kind of wanted to go back. You
Hmm.
mentioned, in Nulo's philosophy, high protein, low carb, low
Hmm.
glycemic
Hmm.
index. I
Hmm.
noticed with the cold pressed, the packaging almost seems like you're marketing against yourself because it says 40% less carbs than another Nulo diet. And I saw a couple other manufacturers at Global Pet kind of messaging low carb. And I know that, in the human food end of the spectrum, we kind of go through phases where carbs are good, carbs are bad. Um, Talk to us a little bit about, the science and the nutritional philosophy behind low carb and pet food.
Yeah. Let's go back to the fundamentals, and that is from a nutritional standpoint, carbohydrates, whether they be starch or fiber, are not an essential nutrient for dogs or cats. In fact, they're not even essential for humans. We tend to think of them though as very valuable sources of available energy, and that's all true. One of the things we run into with the dog and the cat is that they're generally considered to be carnivorous or carnivores. So they're driven by consumption of meat or prey, which are primarily protein and fat. So the notion of adding higher levels of starch into a companion animal diet is sort of a 19th century idea that we could provide minimal levels of protein and fat, the essential amino acids and essential fatty acids, and then fill in the rest of their energy needs with carbohydrates like the starches from grains and other cereals. Fast forward to the late 1990s, early 2000s, we started to look more and more at higher protein diets and whether or not they provided for, I'll call it optimal nutrition for dogs and cats. And we started to learn that we could actually improve lean body mass and decrease fat mass of our companion animals by feeding a higher protein diet. And we're also learning that, higher levels of readily available, highly digestible starches may actually contribute to signals for obesity and dogs and cats becoming overweight. And it may even influence insulin requirements and diabetes. And so when you start to factor all those things in, Michael Michael Landa was working at Pet Staff. They had created this dog walking, dog care group out of Los Angeles. And one of his observations was that they were being asked to provide exogenous insulin to their clients' dogs on a routine basis, and they were getting fatter and fatter. And his observation, with his engineering training and an understanding of science and technology, was that they were probably feeding too much carbohydrates. And that's what really kind of sparked the idea when he and I were talking in 2009 for delivering products that were higher in protein and lower in starch. Because at the end of the day, we're using the starch in a kibble as an example to bind it together, to hold it in place, to create that structure, that crunchiness. And in essence, the dog and the cat don't necessarily need that starch. So we've really pushed forward on a philosophy that higher protein and lower starch and lower glycemic starch is the ideal for our carnivore companions.
And so when we talk about, them, you mentioned fiber and, and keeping some carbohydrates non-gelatinized to get into the gut for
Mm-hmm.
fermentation and gut health. Um, in the wild, as carnivores, they're largely relying on bone and other animal
Mm-hmm.
matter for their fibrous intake.
Right.
And some of that, I guess, is passed through in freeze-dried
Yeah.
or raw diets. You see ground bone and things like that. But I also noted with cold pressed, you mentioned that you found a nice blend using miscanthus, and
Yeah.
in I recently had a talk and had Dustin Dilver from M Fiber on the show.
Oh,
So
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and he and I were talking about. I only learned about miscanthus at the Pet Sustainability Impact on Leash conference last year, and
Okay.
when I learned about it, I was like, why aren't more people talking this up as an ingredient? And very ironically, right after we chatted at Global Pet and before I had him on the show, I saw the article in Pet Food Processing where you made specific reference to miscanthus. So
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit about your choice there of and the inclusion of some fibrous materials in addition to meat, and
Yeah.
how do you strike that balance?
Well, so what we want to make sure that we're covering with any added carbohydrates is that it's supporting the animal's needs in regards to if we need energy sources that we could complement it. Maybe it's part of the food matrix itself to hold it together in the proper manner. I mean, carbohydrates, don't get me wrong, carbohydrates in general are not bad. It's just that we want to have the right quantity and the right type at the right place and time. And to talk specifically about miscanthus, on any of our carbohydrate sources that we use in a pet food, we want to have the ideal mix. And the source has some significant impact on the product as well and the nutrition. So back in time, a number of years ago, I was working was contacted by the folks at Renew Biomass, who are the sellers of M Fiber, and they asked if there was any value in exploring miscanthus grass as an alternative to cellulose, and that's actually something I was very interested in. Have been doing some work in fiber nutrition and companion animals for a couple of decades now, and so we put together a proposal and they funded the research. I think we got six academic peer-reviewed papers out of it with one of my grad students, Renan Donadelli. and evaluating miscanthus grass as an alternate to cellulose, which is a common indigestible, insoluble fiber that's used in pet food manufacturing to lower calories and to give stool quality and consistency and hairball control. There's all sorts of things you can do with high levels of insoluble fiber. We evaluated the miscanthus grass in all of those food formats, dog digest diets, cat diets, hairball diets, and we even conducted a series of studies on fermentation of those fiber sources and found that it's a quality source of insoluble fiber comparable to cellulose. Cellulose comes from wood pulp. It's basically part of the paper and pulp industry. It's relatively expensive, and we thought that a purpose-grown natural grass product would be a better choice for a fiber source. And so, based on that research out of my lab at K-State, in communication with Michael Landa, the founder of Nulo, we thought it would be a good inclusion. So this goes back 6, 7 years ago. We converted all of our fiber choices over to miscanthus grass, and that's our primary source of fiber across the board.
Yeah, and the sustainability benefits of it are phenomenal.
Yeah, sustainability, and you were talking about this ecological sustainability in from an agro standpoint, and the thing is the economic inputs necessary to keep miscanthus growing are very minimal, and they're great for controlling erosion of modest quality soils. So, it's just got a great story all the way around.
Yeah, yeah. No, Dustin and I have had a great conversation on it. So, not to plug my own episodes here, but if you want to learn more about miscanthus, check out the pet working episode with Dustin Dover from Ed Fiber. Fantastic conversation and a great lesson in sustainability and choice of ingredients. Um, so, Dr. Aldrich, talk to us a little bit about, I know you and I mentioned that when we were talking, prior to having you on the show here, about the focus of Nulo targeting the aspirational athlete. And,
Yeah,
we've seen, year over year, Nulo has gotten bigger and bigger. And, recently you introduced the partnership with Simone Biles. I understand you have partnership with some other Olympians.
right.
We have the Olympics coming up in Paris this summer, but I think it's a really key message, focusing on the nutrition component, driving athletic performance and athletic success. Talk to us about how you're linking that to nutrition and pet food, and you know I kind of wonder, do we see going forward even more tailored nutrition, and rotational nutrition depending on your dog's activity levels. If you're gearing up to run a 5K with your dog, or I go ski joring with Peony in the winter. She's out there running with me on the cross country ski trails. Um, is that something that we could see at some point where, you might tailor your diet to treat your dog as an athlete? Is that part of Nulo's vision?
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily part and parcel for where we are headed. Although I will tell you that long term, I think there's going to be more segmentation in the market that will take into account not so much breed as much as specific nutritional requirements for various levels of activity and sizes and even weather or climate impacts. But our primary link there, and I'm not the greatest marketer in the world, so I'll try to capture this best I can and understand it. But in essence, one of the positioning tenets at the very beginning of Nulo was to work with elite athletes. And if you speak with elite athletes, one of the things that they'll share with you is that a limitation for their performance is many times not their training as much as it is nutrition, especially nutrition leading up to race day or the event day, and then during that activity, especially in some of our high performance areas like endurance athletes or even folks like Simone Biles, who's a gymnast. I mean, those are grueling days when they're in the gym and they're either in preparation, but also during the events. I mean, they're long days and they have to keep balanced, focused. They've got to have plenty of energy to get through their day and not have upset stomachs and other kinds of things. And so as you know, those elite athletes are looking at nourishment for themselves. They also use those same sort of litmus tests for the foods that they bring in for their family and their pet. And it's that sort of messaging that it's important because many of them have very vehement fans and followers in their community. And that's the community that we're sort of focusing our attention on, because there's millions of aspirational athletes that have following some athlete in the Olympics or in other sports. And our message, I think, gets through to them a little better because the people that they look up to as the decision makers on their nourishment, they are going to give them some credence or credit in regards to the choices that the aspirational athlete or our Nulo community might be looking for. So, you know, in this world of credibility, I'm a scientist. I'm trained in this academic world, and I don't think the consumers necessarily believe it when I say that this is what's working. But with one of their heroes that says it's working, I think they have more credibility. And so if we can use them to help with that message, that's kind of where we've placed our products. And it's not so much about the athletic dog, it's more about the athlete and their relationship with their pet, because many of them will tell you that their pet is their emotional center when they're going through this grueling training program, and to keep their emotions and their energy at the right point. And so we're providing support to their team.
Yeah. Yeah, no, where I was thinking, as you're talking about, gearing up for big conversations or, I think, I'm more of a skier and I've never been a runner, but I did work in Boston for a few years in the wine industry. And early in my career, I started in consulting, and then we were all laid off in the recession. And I very much remember, around the marathon, people coming in and carbo loading at Legal Seafoods, and getting as much pasta and everything into their diets. And then post race, it was very
Yeah.
much protein focused to aid in muscle recovery. Do you see? I mean, we're obviously not there yet with pet food, at least not for your everyday, your aspirational athlete dog, so to speak. Maybe for dogs that are in the Iditarod, they're gearing up. But do you see, potentially down the road that there being this opportunity? And the other thing I'd love to get your take on, you said, maybe not as much breed specific focus. I know that that's another route that people have tried to tackle with regards to appropriate nutrition.
Mhm.
Is there any credence to breed specific nutrition? And and do you see an opportunity to kind of have that you know rotational differing diets, gearing your dog up for whatever, if it's coming into ski season and your dog's going to want to be outside more and it's not hot in the summer or things like that?
So, short answer is yes, all of those things are probably going to emerge in our understanding over the next few decades. Let me frame this up in a completely different way to answer your question than you may be expecting, and that is that the American taxpayers spend billions of dollars annually on their own health through National Institute of Health, or we spend a lot of money for taxpayer dollars on funding research for livestock that are going to be used for our own food through the USDA. The area of nutrition research in companion animals is sponsored exclusively and wholly by the industry. We get zero taxpayer dollars to do real nutrition research. Because of that, we're about 50 years behind human, and heavens, we're 50 years behind pig and poultry nutrition. in regards to knowing what the requirements truly are. So while I think we're going to make a lot of advances in the next few years, it's in many cases being supported by the ingredient industry, by some of the pet food companies themselves, and by some special interest groups. And the people that don't have a say in this, that and it's their fault because they're not asking to, are the pet owners. They're not actually putting it or investing a dime into nutrition evaluation for their own animals. So long term, I think we need to get pet owners engaged in this process, and then we can really make the headway into some of the nutritional needs we need to know for things like what you just said. Are breeds really different? Are climatic or seasonal differences really a thing? What are the requirements for any given breed or any given life stage? Today, we're doing the best we can with the limited knowledge we have been able to gather. I think we've done an exceptional job for our companion animals in the industry, in the trade, but we got a long ways to go and we're way behind other species.
You're right. It was not exactly the way I was expecting you to frame it up, but I'm very glad you did. That's a great point. It's a really good point. And I think we're on the cusp. I think we're finally starting to see, the evolution of an ecosystem. We're seeing, genetic data. Mars has its biobank project. At Western Vet, we saw Royal Canin roll out a partnership with Wisdom Panel that is going to drive nutritional recommendations based on DNA. I think Hills already has a partnership with Embark where you do an Embark DNA kit. But that what you're touching on is it's still scientific, but it's on the general nutrition side of how do I deliver the maximum nutritional benefit to an animal, regardless of their breed, of their DNA, and as we've seen, there's scientific research out there to show, look, the minimally processed diets are offering a you know more complete nutritional solution for your pets. And in addition to kind of the spike in freeze dried, air dried, um, slow cooked, whatever you want to describe as your alternative cooking method. I think the other really cool thing that we saw at Global Pet was that there's been a lot of effort to make this category more accessible for consumers.
Mhm,
Both
mhm,
Nulo with cold press, Prime
mhm.
with kibble in the raw, Ziwi came out with steam dried, uh, all kind of introducing this, new segment of category where it's offering a discount compared to traditional freeze dried. On a cost per day basis, Dr. Aldrich, what are we looking at? If you were to feed Nulo freeze dried exclusively versus Nulo cold pressed.
So I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I got a picture in my head of the chart, but I don't remember the numbers. But um, let me frame it up by saying that the cold pressed is about equivalent to what it would be for a premium can. So it's well within the range of what people are feeding today. And instead of feeding a premium canned food, you can feed the cold pressed. And what's the advantage or disadvantage? Well, you don't have to have a can opener, number one. Um, and if you are traveling or you'd rather feed something that's dry in the bowl and then top it with a can, there's all sorts of options and opportunities there with cold pressed. The freeze dried is certainly at the top of the cost charts on a cost per day feeding. Freeze dried is basically meat that's had the water removed, and so uh, it's kind of at the highest price in the category that you can go. I don't know what else to say in regards to that. I want to give you a figure that I came across here recently online, and I thought it was really fascinating. that in the U.S. we spend almost $22 a day to feed ourselves. That's between grocery purchases and out eating out at restaurants and institutional food service. Uh, on average, we spend $2 a day to feed our companion animals. And my argument here is that if the dog and the cat, as we talk about in many cases, 67 to 70% of consumers, pet owners, consider their animal to be a member of their family. I would think that somewhere along the line, we'd increase that cost per day of what we're feeding if we truly value them as family members. And so, I would say that, as we move forward into the next few years, instead of $2 a day, we'd be looking at somewhere around 5 to 7. And it's not that our products are in that category at the moment, but that's kind of where we think the appetite for foods by pet owners that consider them family should probably be.
Well, and it's interesting because there's statistics out there. I think, folks in the US, 90 to 92% of pet owning families say that they consider their pet a member of the family. But similar to, and it's an interesting statistic because if we're, if we're thinking, for a family of four, you're spending maybe $80 a day to feed you,
Mhm.
your kids, your significant other, and then you're spending $2 a day on your dog, um, or your cat. That's $60 a month. If you were to even double that to $4 a day, you're at $120 a month.
Right.
And I get it. I get, people need to save money where they can, but I make the same argument about pet insurance all the time. There's only 4% of dog owners have pet insurance in this country.
Mhm.
92% say their dog is a member of the family or is like their child, their fur baby.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
would never let your kid be uninsured.
Mhm.
You would never sit there and say, I'm going to feed my kid, at a tenth of the cost of what I'm going to feed myself. It just, there is a disconnect there. And, I again, it's back to that balance of cost, convenience, and nutrition. And, I think the more we can do to research better options for our pets and the ultimate goal for any of us, I think, is, we want more time.
Mhm.
And that comes down to making sure they get the best care at the vet, that they eat the best food, and you
Mhm.
know you explore the options, whether it's anti-aging supplements or therapeutics that are coming out. But they're if we're going to look at dogs and cats as being our family, our children, they are the children that, without exception, almost you will outlive, and it's
Mhm.
very painful. So you want to make that time as long as you can and as good as
Mhm.
you can.
Mhm.
And so I think it's great that we're seeing these nutritional advances and people calling for an increased commitment to pet food research and to spending and making sure that our pets are being treated the way that we want to characterize them. Um, so on that note, I'd be doing all of our listeners a disservice if I didn't give you the opportunity to tell us when and where we can expect cold press to launch, and how they can trial it. I think Gently Cooked is either out now or
Yeah.
coming out
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah. Gently
Um,
cooked is in the market already, and so you'll be able to find it at your independent pet retailers in the next few weeks. Of course, it's already at some of the other major outlets. For cold pressed, we launched it I'll put that in air quotes, launched it at Global Pet Expo in Florida, but we're in the final throes of getting the packaging landed in the factory, and so we'll be at the kitchen air level, and it should be coming out in stores in late May, early June. Our
very
freeze
cool.
dried, we've resized the packaging, so it's really not so much about any changes to the foods themselves, as much as trying to make sure and communicate through the packaging that this is a complete and balanced diet that folks can use either as a whole meal or as a component of a meal. But we like this mix it meal kind of approach where you, as the pet owner, can add various things like broth and freeze dried and shredded products out of the pouches or cans that we offer, and really make an experience for both you and your pet around food time. And all of them would be nutritionally complete and balanced.
Yeah, and you have the new toppers, the shredded pouches that are
Yeah,
at Petco now. Uh, I had a chance to
the
try
the gently cooked. Yeah, the gently cooked.
the gently cooked, and then there's the smaller shredded ones, the
Right,
like chicken, mackerel, and mussel was the
right.
one I think I tried the other day. That
Yeah,
Annie liked that quite a bit.
yeah.
Um,
They're fun to open up, especially if you've got a cat, because they just love the aroma, and so you'll have fun with those products. Dogs do as well.
yeah, no, they're great. That's very cool. And I know we're coming up on time here, but I guess just to close, any exciting developments? Obviously, you just launched a whole slew of new props at Global Pet, but anything we can be on the lookout for Super Zoo later this year, or
Well, we
you know
we
what?
are we are yeah. Thank you for that. We are working on curating our list of innovations for Super Zoo. We're really going to have more of a focus on treats. That's been one of those areas that Nulo's focused on less than whole or nutritionally complete foods. We think that there are some opportunities there for us to use the same nutritional philosophy in the treat category. So be on the lookout for some clever new ideas in this area of treats that you can either provide as an indulgence item one at a time, or do it as part of the mix it meal concept. And then we have some packaging updates that we've been wanting to roll out for quite some time, and they won't be so much innovation in product as much as better approach to more easily to manage packaging in our primary line, the Freestyle line.
Very cool. Yeah, well, we'll look forward to seeing that at Super Zoo.
Yeah.
I will be there August 14th to 16th.
Yep.
Coincides nicely with my 40th birthday and the last day of the show. So,
Well, there you
uh,
go. We'll bring you
yeah,
a
well,
cupcake.
sounds good. Well,
Yeah.
I might also
So
try to throw out some sort of celebration the night before we all take off.
So
But
one other
uh,
thing, Peter, before I leave, and that is of course, we've got the Olympics coming up late July and
yeah,
early August, and we've signed a number of additional athletes. So I'd ask your listeners to be on the lookout for some of their heroes in the Olympics, and where Nulo might be able to support some of their pursuits.
yeah. No, I was just gonna say, that's the other big thing we have coming up before Super Zoo is, you have the partnership with Simone Biles, and I think you had said you've got six other Olympic athletes that you're going to be
Six
unveiling
and
partnerships with.
Yeah, six and counting.
Wow. So I'm assuming we'll be seeing some commercials during the NBC broadcast.
Yeah, I don't know about the commercials at NBC. I'm not in charge of that budget. But we've certainly seen some press releases coming out. So there'll be some notifications of when and where they'll be and some of the activities coming up. So be on the lookout.
Very cool. Well, it's a very exciting time to be at Nulo. Dr. Aldrich has been there from the beginning, but in an official capacity for the last 15 months. And we continue to see great innovations from y'all, and really value the work that you're doing to advance nutritional science within the pet food space. So I look forward to keeping in touch, and definitely we'll see you at Super Zoo, and we'll be on the lookout for those commercials come the Olympic Games in July/August.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for the invitation, Peter.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is Peter Kenseth with Petworking, everybody. Dr. Craig Aldrich, Chief Operating Officer of Nulo. Thanks for taking the time today, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.